Hey cats and kittens, this is Tyson coming at you with another screencast for Unit 5, the first one. We're going to think about negative and positive externalities and how to graph them. So the big idea here is that this is a good where if we produce it, the producer is bearing some of the cost, but also some of the cost is being left to innocent bystanders who are nearby, right? So if you imagine that perhaps you live close by to where somebody builds a hog farm, and then you have to smell the hog farm every day, and it smells worse and worse the more and more hogs they raise. Or if your neighbors get a whole bunch of dogs and leave them outside and they bark all the time and it disrupts your quiet. Or if there's a factory that produces tires and they dump a bunch of sludge into the nearby waterways and leave a lot of smog in the air so that it's difficult to breathe. So I guess if you've read the Lorax, you could think about all of the harm that falls upon the brown barbalutes in their barbalute suits, and all of the harm that comes upon the swami swans and the humming fish and that sort of thing. The Onceler, of course, doesn't care about the harm that comes to them. The Onceler wants to produce thneeds at the rate that's important to them to maximize profit. So they're thinking about expanding their operation whenever the marginal revenue for them is greater to produce another thneed than the marginal cost that they incur producing that other thneed. They're not thinking about the marginal cost of the humming fish or the barbalutes or the swami swans. So other names that you could see this type of problem go by, we could think of this as third-party costs, because all those other groups are not the buyer or the seller, so they're third parties, or spillover costs. And the big idea on our graph here, if you look, is that demand is marginal private benefit, but that also equals marginal social benefit. And when all those three things are equal, or if you show them as equal on your graph, you are showing the person that looks at your graph, hey, I know that there's no disruption on the benefit side of the equation. Marginal benefit is functioning as it should, but when we look up here and we see these two upsloping lines and we notice that these things aren't equal, then we'll know that there's a disruption on the cost side, on the supply side of the situation. So supply is marginal private cost. That is the Onceler making thneeds based on the cost that he incurs. But those two things are less than marginal social cost. And the difference there is the marginal external cost. So that's how much stink you have to endure the next time the farmer decides to add one pig to the hog confinement facility. Or it's the harm that's done to the barbalutes and the humming fish and the swami swans when the Onceler creates one more thneed. So from this kind of a setup, you should be able to compare two different prices and quantities and then work to find some areas. So first thing we can think about is how many thneeds will be produced and what will the price of one be? Well, the Onceler is going to behave according to this line right here. That's the supply curve, and that's his marginal private cost. Of course, this will determine the price and quantity in the market, and I've identified those as price market and quantity market so you can see them. And as you normally would, you'd be able then to come back and say, well, okay, this is the area of consumer surplus that we get because there's somebody up here that's willing to pay a lot for a thneed, but we know that the market price is just $3.98. And here is a producer surplus, and of course there's some of those thneeds that are really cheap to produce because the truffula trees are really close by to the factory and you don't have to haul a bunch of the tufts from the truffula trees back to the factory, and these ones practically knit themselves. So it's really, really cheap to make that one, but you still sell it for $3.98, so you reap a bunch of producer surplus. At any rate, that's kind of the setup for the basic market. However, we have a bit of a problem here because we have all of this external cost. Notice this is the height of the marginal external cost. Maybe I can repaste that so it'll pop on top. Basically what that's telling us is, hey, look, this is the total amount of cost that's imposed upon the swami swans, the humming fish, and the brown barbalutes in their barbalute suits. And what you could put together, if you sort of thought through how those shapes work, is we had made the wrong amount. We overproduced. How do we know that? Well, let's think about what a socially optimal price and quantity would be. Goodness, my shapes are all over the top of my dotted lines. If we look at where the marginal private cost and the marginal social cost and the marginal social benefit intersect, that's right here, that tells us that's a socially optimal point. Well, we've made too many. You could say that you'd need to know that we have over-allocated resources to the production of this good, and that the market has ended up underpricing the good. So you can see that by the comparison of the two prices and the two quantities. And from this, we could deduce that we should not have made units between QSO and Q market. Why not? Well, let's think about the QSO. Let's just go over 2 or so units from there. Here is a few distances. Let's think about. So this distance right here, for that QSO plus 2th unit, whatever, maybe this is a 48th need. We're analyzing the production of the 48th need here. Well, here's how much it cost us as a society to produce that 48th need. And let's just think then, to compare a little bit, here's how much we benefited from that need, right here. Okay, so how bad of an idea was it for us to make that need? Well, it's the difference. It's the red part that's sticking out above the blue. And so that tells you, here's the net loss, not net gain. In other words, producing that particular need right there incurred a net loss to society. We should not have made it because we had to spend more resources, the red line, to produce it than we got benefit out of producing it. So there's your basic picture for a negative externality. And maybe we can repeat the process with a positive externality, and you can sort of think along with and try to worry about trying to think about the shapes that there are there. Okay, so what's the big idea here? Well, now we have to think about a kind of a different example. This is a good where when you buy one and enjoy it, you get a bunch of the benefit, but your neighbors get some of the benefit too. So let's say that you installed a fancy lighting and security system, or got a really awesome guard dog around your house. Your neighbors might feel a little bit safer. Or if you planted some beautiful flowers and did some landscaping in front of your house, the people that live across the street from you, they might enjoy a nicer view. And if they were inclined to sell their house, it might sell for a little bit higher value because the looking out the living room window at the flowers across the street is really pretty. So big idea here is that what we have is a marginal external benefit that accrues to somebody who's not the buyer. So this is a spillover benefit, or a benefit that accrues to a third party. And this is reflected over here in this equation/inequality. You have demand as marginal private benefit. That's you thinking about how many flowers will I buy. Well, your analysis of that is going to incorporate the benefit you reap, but not necessarily the external benefit that your neighbors reap. Gosh, we wish that demand would behave like marginal social benefit over here, but that would only happen if you took into consideration the benefits others would get, not the benefits that you get. So that basically tells you the disruption is on the benefit or the demand side of the equation. Here we know all three of these things are equal: supply, marginal private cost, marginal social cost. That means there's no marginal external cost to somebody else. The entire cost of the flowers is borne by whatever nursery you went to buy and plant them. Okay. Let's think about a couple of quantities and prices now. So here is, if we look for the intersection of marginal private benefit and marginal private cost, that'll tell us what the private market will do. The private market quantity and price will always come from the intersection of the two privates, right there. Okay. What about the socially optimal ones? Well, that would come at the intersection of marginal social benefit and marginal social cost. You know that's the amount that we ought to make as a society. So from this, you can deduce a couple of things. Look at the quantities. You can tell that we made too few. We underallocated resources to the production of this good. And the price was too low. We didn't really capture the full value that that last unit produced us. This will be a more familiar shape of deadweight loss right here. Sorry if the triangle doesn't match up perfectly with the area it's supposed to, but you can kind of figure out where I'm trying to shade there. That deadweight loss shape tells us same kind of idea as before. In this case, we'll use red again for cost, and we'll think about this unit right in here. Well, how much did this unit cost us to make? There it is right there. And how much benefit did we get from that last unit? Well, we'll break it down in kind of a different way this time. That's how much benefit the buyer got from that unit. And here's how much benefit, well, we know actually, we already know. This is the amount of benefit that somebody who's not the buyer gets from each and every unit, right? Marginal external benefit. So what does that mean? That means really that we're dealing with this amount right here is the benefit that accrues to the non-buyer. Well, let's look at the total stack of benefit that comes from this, 53rd flower or something. Look at the blue line plus the green line. The total height is up here. That's how much benefit, total benefit, marginal social benefit to everyone in society. The buyer in blue, the people who live across the street from whoever's going to plant the flowers in green. And how much marginal cost did that 53rd flower give us? Well, it cost that much to produce it. So I think if you look at the amount of green that's sticking out through the orange triangle, that tells you here's how much we should have made that next unit, but we didn't. So that's deadweight loss that results from underproduction. And notice that deadweight loss that results from underproduction is pretty much what you've learned to expect as a shape for deadweight loss. Deadweight loss that results from overproduction is the backwards triangle that we saw in the previous video. Here's a shape that represents the amount of total benefit that people got. These are people who didn't plant the flowers. They got this much external benefit. And really the problem is that we didn't quite capture that. The private market didn't quite produce enough to capture all that benefit. So you can kind of work through and think about where is the consumer surplus and where's the producer surplus. And if you think about what happens at market equilibrium, I think that'll help you do that. This triangle here might be our consumer surplus, and this triangle down here might be our producer surplus. And I believe through some fancy laws of area that this rectangle has actually the same area as a parallelogram that fits right in here and all the way over there like that. Somebody that knows more about parallelograms than me can confirm how you find the area of that, but I would bet that if we were to stretch and twist this light blue rectangle around, it would fit right in there where you see that marginal external benefit. And that would be another way of thinking about areas so that they don't overlap, so that you don't kind of twist up your brain by thinking about how the same area can represent gain to one person and also loss or gain to somebody else. But I hope that helps with graphing positive and negative externalities. And the next time we'll look at ways of fixing them, remedies for externalities. Thank you.